Hello, world. This is the Brother to Brother Show. I'm your host, K-Mo. Thank you for taking this journey with us with real men, real problems, real solutions. Let's go. All right, we want to say welcome back to the Brother to Brother Show. I have two good brothers here. I am your host, K-Mo, and I have with me Mr. KC. KC, say hey to everybody.
What's up, y'all?
And I have another special guest. He's been on our other podcast, Dr. G. Say hey to our listeners.
Hello, everybody.
All right. So today we have a really good topic. We're in a state of COVID still, and we're also going through, we just had the march on Washington a few days ago, and we just wanted to touch on some stuff. We were having some conversation around that. But also we had a really good conversation around just men in general. And one word that's been thrown out there for many, many years that we've all heard, but we really wanted to see what that sounded like, what young people look at and hear and what is that definition around brotherhood. So I want each one of us to kind of go around and give us a brief explanation when we were growing up, what brotherhood looked like for us and what that sounded like and what it meant for us growing up. So I'll go first. Again, this is K-Mo. When I think of brotherhood, I think of, men of color. When I can remember growing up and seeing black men during the the Million Man March, and hear Louis Farrakhan, hear Jesse Jackson, hear Obama talk about, hey brother, making sure that we reached out to each other. It's a foundational word for me. That's how I look at it. Also, it's a strong word in the sense of you just catch an eye with another a man of color, and you kind of understand that struggle. To me, also it means to me struggle. And so when I hear that word and I really describe it and I think about it, like it means a lot to me now back then, but I don't know how strong I feel about it right now. I feel like, but I had prominent other men like yourself, Dr. G, even growing up, even with KC around and having those other men to kind of sharpen me, make me better. And it has meaning to it, even though we're not brothers by blood. I still feel like there's a level of like almost blood brothers, as you could think about it like that. So that's what I think about when I think about brotherhood. It has a lot of meaning. It's powerful. It has something that we both can relate on and in on a struggle standpoint. But now I think that's kind of dwindled down, even though we're going through the same type of struggles we did 20 to 25 years ago. What about you, Casey?
So I agree with a lot of what you said, K-Mo. When I think of brotherhood, especially in the sense of a group, I think of there's a common bond. There's some responsibility that we all have to those within the brotherhood. There is accountability, where we're all accountable for our actions and we're all accountable for keeping each other accountable. There's a common respect.
All right, we're back. Sorry about that. We had a special guest to come in. This is Rio was back with us. So, but we were just finishing up what KC was talking about. Go ahead, respect.
And so respect, and not only respect to ourselves, but also respect to others. Demonstrated appreciation. I think sometimes we always talk about how we appreciate each other, but we don't really demonstrate it. And then, action. I talked about action before, but action right now is more important than anything. That we need to have solidarity. We need to have an action plan that's going to help us move forward. And as a brotherhood, we need to have that roadmap that says this is what we're going to do. This is what we are aspiring to. So those are all things that I think are involved and incorporated in Brotherhood.
Okay. Harris, you want to go next?
Yes, sir. I agree with each of you all, and I just wanted to just kind of expand a little bit on the concept of brotherhood. You know, in its really simple sense, it's a relationship between brothers through association, whether that's a common association and a membership of association, or you're a family member. But I primarily think about brotherhood as a family. In terms of, you know, how we interact with each other and the larger humanity of brotherhood, as well as in certain corners in terms of our religion and our faith, and even in our civic and community kinds of ways. We can all partner together in a brotherhood or having a common mission, a common goal, and work toward it. But I really like a lot of the things that were said about, you know, accountability and trust. And respect. I think so fundamental to brotherhood and to family is respect. And I think we have to acknowledge that all of us are different in our own unique ways. And while a lot of times we like to think of ourselves all as one and all the same, the reality is that we're not. We may be sharing some common experiences, but we're all experiencing those common experiences differently. While we can relate to them, we just don't quite know how one person from another might be experiencing it, internalizing it, or externalizing it for that matter. So I think respecting different people, their views, their ideas, and I think with a lot of things that are going on right now nationwide and even internationally, actually, I think we have some assumptions about how we think people should embrace different movements, different ideas, different events. And I think just kind of respecting the fact that people can have a different view, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to see change. So I do think respect is so fundamental. And I also think, you know, when I think about my own immediate family with my siblings, and I have an older brother, I think about, you know, just the kind of attention and care and love that and support that my brother has provided me in the way that he can provide it. Because a lot of what we know about relationships, whether that be brotherhood or whether that be love or whether that be how we show patience, a lot of this stuff is learned in our family context. You know, our homes are our first classrooms. Our parents or our significant others, whomever those people may be, are in fact our first teachers. And so how we love and how we embrace and how we feel about ourselves doing it, I think is in large part due to those learned contexts. So I do think that I don't think it's a lost cause. I do think there are different generations and different ideas about what brotherhood might be. But I think overall, I do think as a nation of people, we have some idea that brotherhood means an association, something that we have in common. And I think we just have to find what those common grounds are now, because the generations have changed so much and the interests have changed so much. And then we have to remember social media and the information technology age has also crept in and separated some common bonds and some common knowledge about what we should be concerned about. And so, you know, I'm open to any comments regarding those views on brotherhood.
All right. What about you, Rio? You stepped in. What do you got to say about what you think about brotherhood? I know we were talking about it before you stepped in, but what is your thought process and when you hear brotherhood, especially growing up? I think that's what Casey and I were really talking about, and Mr. G, your mindset when you had to bring, you know, when you were coming up. I mentioned, you know, the men in my life and even guys I may have played sports with, having a level of brotherhood and relationships with that, but having it now and going to what Mr. G said about social media has played a huge part on what that looks like and separated us to a certain degree. What does that come to mind when you think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys all bring up really good points. And I think, you know, one of the things as it pertains to, I think, social media I think social media allows people to voice an opinion, almost immediately. And I think, that's a very dangerous thing to have, right? Because we all have opinions and thoughts that aren't often shared in such an immediate fashion that you can't take back. Where we wouldn't necessarily voice those, but sort of having the power of keyboard sometimes is a very dangerous tool to have. But, as far as like the collective around brotherhood and what it means, again, listening to some of the thoughts that you guys have, like definitely sharing those. Some of the things that I think are super important is for us that is often missed is having empathy and tolerance for one another. I think it's something that is definitely missing in society as a whole, but is especially important to have through brotherhood. And I always feel like one's journey is their own journey, and their experiences dictate their ideology of life and what that means. And so having empathy for someone else's experience is super important. Another thing that I think I heard you guys kind of talk on is sort of the respect, having respect for one another, no matter the situation or the differences is important. And accountability for one another, it rings really true for me. So if I think about a brother, I'm accountable for that person, as well as that person for me. And what I mean is I'm not accountable for all of their actions, but I'm accountable for the brotherhood that we share. And it's very similar to any relationship. Like the brotherhood is just a relationship, right? So, there's accountability in relationships, and when there's lack of accountability on either side, it's hard to have a relationship. And I think, one of the things looking at from a brotherhood standpoint, I think, having strength is really, really, really important for brotherhood, because the strength of that relationship, the bond of that relationship, secures the brotherhood, right? Because then in turn turns into trust, right? And then that turns into affection and love. And so having the strength, even in difficult times, to continue to stay and bond together, I think it could be lacking today. And then one of the
before you touch on that, can you explain to our listeners what does strength mean to you? Because when I first heard you say it, I thought you meant strength in numbers and but I think you mean something different. Yeah. I don't want,
No, I mean, I think a lot of times we'll see where, let's say if a brother missteps, right? And then having sort of the strength to support that person when they're at their lowest, like that takes a certain strength, right? But then through that strength creates the trust and the bond and the love, right? And I think a lot of times like they say, we're in a culture of cancellation. And so a lot of times we're so quick to cancel instead of quick to hold up and support. But that's not an easy task. You got to have strength in order to do that. And not everyone has that. And so, I think if you want to talk about true brotherhood, that's true brotherhood, right? It's always holding on to that strength. And then sometimes leaning on your brother for more strength, right? When you're at your weakest point. And so, strength is really key to me. So that's what I mean. But I think strength in numbers is also very, very, very important. The only reason I think there's a difference between those two is just like you don't need numbers in order to bond to have a brother, right? And so, I do feel that the strength is super important to that equation. One of the other things I'd say is actions over words. So I believe in actions over word in general. And I live my life based on like the action over my words. I think a lot of times people have a lot of words, but not enough action. And, and everyone's character should be judged off their actions. And I think we're in a place where words sometimes overshadows, and that's a part of social media as well. Social media is filled with words and no action, right? And the people who are really doing the work and the actions typically aren't on social media. They're out with the action. Yeah. So there's a big disconnect around that.
I'm gonna pass. I think Casey has something to say, but and then I want Mr. Dr. G to answer this question. But thank you for that, Rio. Some of the things that you spoke about, and I heard Dr. G speak about before our podcast that I know you're going to talk to our listeners about. But you talked about trust, Rio, positivity, respect, accountability. And then I think that those four have to be there so you can have the strength. Some of what I think also comes from that is if you don't have the trust, you don't have the positivity, the respect, you can't I don't believe you can give somebody else the strength they need to get through those situations. So like I said before, me knowing Dr. G growing up, not knowing all what was going on in your personal life and things of that nature, I always felt that you had the positivity. I always trusted you, always had a level of respect for you. And you also always kept me accountable. That's how I felt like I could go to. I say all that, I'm just being honest with you, Dr. G, about that. Yeah. And I think that's important to say that because nowadays, how do we get back? I want to turn it over to KC, and then I want Mr. Dr. G to continue to talk.
Okay. Yes.
If you want to add something to what I was saying or just answer the question too.
Yeah, and it's that accountability that I think we all talked about. Rio, Dr. G, and then also you came up. We have an accountability to each other in times of good, bad, when we are celebrating, and also when we're chastising. That we need to keep our brotherhood, our community, our group accountable. I think a lot about now this whole thing with domestic violence and how, we're talking about Black men are getting killed by police and all this social unrest. And one thing that's not talked about as much is domestic violence against Black women. And the fact that we are accountable, Black men, to protect Black women, period. And we are not doing a good job of it, and we need to do better. And so that is an example of how we need to keep each other accountable. I was talking to my daughter, and she had a saying that, every woman knows somebody that's been abused by a man. How many men can raise their hand and say, I know a man that has been an abuser? Because most men won't say that. Even if they know, they won't keep that person accountable. And so we just need to be more accountable, not only in our philosophy of life, but in our actions in life. And I think these times, more so than any other, create a need for us to do rather than to say. And so that accountability has to come with action. That accountability has to come with trust. That accountability has to come from a good place. Ria, you want to say any more?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it got me really kind of thinking that I think one of the other important aspects to sort of the brotherhood is diversity of experiences. Because I think, a lot of times, I think they like to think of us as a people as being very monolithic, which we aren't. But I think we also do ourselves a disservice by saying that there's one type, like one way that we should be. And I think that, from a cultural standpoint, I think that we are extremely diverse. And I think that all should be respected for their diversity. And I think, again, a lot of times we don't necessarily support that. So I would say that, that's something that's extremely important to me personally, is recognizing diversity of thought, diversity of experience. And so I try to constantly remind myself of the importance of that.
All right. Dr. G, can you talk a little bit more about, I think you had some explanation around brotherhood and I know we talked about accountability and some other things here, but I want us to wrap back around how we get back to that.
I wanted to highlight several things that have already been said, and you brothers are right on point in this conversation. But I think KC kind of triggered something for me this morning, and hit home, because my mother was in an abusive relationship with my father growing up,
right?
And I witnessed one incident that I could recall as a youngster. I had to be about maybe 4 or 5 years old, but it took me many years, way into my 30s, late 30s, almost 40, to confront my father about what I saw when I was 4 or 5, and what that meant. And I had harbored it for many years, because I knew that was not the way you treated women. I knew that. I had enough sense to know that, and I still know that. So I don't treat women disrespectfully. But let's say if my mother had not left that situation and got us into a better situation, I could have saw his behavior as the norm. And even though I would have known it wasn't the right thing to do, it was the thing that I saw modeled. And so we justify and rationalize the things that we know aren't right, but it's a part of our lived experience. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that there are a lot of young men and young women who are growing up in similar contexts, because what happens in the family is generally a private matter. And so we're all taught that you don't talk about what goes on in the family, and that you keep the family business private. But then some of us are tortured, you know what I mean, daily. And I'm certain that everybody has a different story to tell around this. But I wanted to just kind of say that we, in terms of the new generation of young men today, I think our duty is, and it has always been my compassion, to help build a new brand or a new future for young men, so they don't have to experience these things. That if they do experience them, there are people that they can go to and talk to. I don't remember anybody that I could go to and talk to about that incident. I had to just endure it, and I had to use whatever tools, knowledge, experience that I had garnered from my upbringing to find a place for it. And I put it on a spot in my mind, and it stayed there for a long time until I could get it out, and I could get it out respectfully. And I heard us, we've been talking about respect. I didn't want to disrespect my father, but I did want to let him know. And I asked him the simple question, why did you hurt our mother? And he was shocked. He said, I didn't know you knew anything about it. He said, and he apologized. And he told me about his experiences, and that he was young. He drank too much, but he told me something that just dissipated all the negative feelings that I had. He said, your mother was the best thing that ever happened to me. He said, I was just too stupid to know it. And that changed everything for me. From that point on.
Let's stay right there. Let's stay right there for real quick, because we have about 8 more minutes, and I want you to tie into what you said. What are you doing now? Because you mentioned that. What are you doing now to help the next generation understand the things that you've experienced, like the things you said you already knew? I mean, you had to just figure it out. What are you doing now since you have that information to kind of help the brothers?
What I do now is and the impetus of me speaking about it is I try to build relationships with young men, because I assume that everybody that I meet, everybody that I teach, everybody that I come in contact with has had some kind of life trauma. And I create a safe context for people to share. Sometimes that may take some people 6 months. Some other folks, it may take a year before they feel comfortable sharing with you things that have bothered them most of their lives. And that's a two-way street. Everybody takes a risk. Some folks share, some folks do. But I'm there for that particular reason. If they choose not to share, that's fine. But, we can talk and create a context for them to share. Or if it's such that I think they might want to get some additional assistance, professional services or what have you, I try to talk to them about doing that. And even if I may go with them to make them feel safe. But I do think that we have a lot of hurt in our community, and some of that hurt hurt gets directed back at our community. And I think that's one of the things that we don't really talk about a lot. But there's a lot of intergenerational trauma and family trauma that permeates in everything that we do. It permeates in our own relationship with our own wives and significant others. And so it's more hurtful than it is helpful. And I think we have to build relationships, but don't force those relationships to be built. Awesome. If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. We got a few more minutes. Do Casey and Rio, you want to touch on anything before we round it up on Brotherhood and just, no? No. I think for myself, I really appreciate you all having this conversation. I think when we first kind of threw it out there, it was kind of like a thing that we're going to talk about. But I think Dr. G, when you kind of even just start speaking about it, we said we had to kind of like talk about this, and it's very, very important to share with other men of color, just in general, because it's not just Black men who have trauma. There are other cultures that have trauma and issues too that may have that mirror the same thing that we've had going on in our lives, and we just don't know it. And if this can touch those other young men, those other brothers, to make sure that they, once they leave here and hopefully listen to this podcast and create those bonds, but also just like I would look at any relationship that I'm in, any serious relationship that I'm going to entertain, you got to have that trust. You got to have that positivity, as Rio said, the respect, accountability. And I believe that with strength in numbers, because I think in numbers, doesn't have to be a ton of numbers, but we're able to do that with ourselves. We're able to have this podcast. We're able to do that because it even has me thinking about just some of the relationships I've had with young people, to continue those relationships, because I for myself, I thought that it was important for me to do it. But I think in a previous podcast, it's hard for young people these days because they're in the microwave generation to seek the knowledge and the information that I once may have wanted. They may think that they have it already. And we've all been teenagers before. We know how that feels, but I think it's magnified right now. So for us to really reach back out to that young 20-year-old or 30-year-old or 35-year-old that just is kind of like teetering from one, just having a conversation with them and say, hey, we're here. Let's try to think about certain things, and hopefully they're receptive to it. If we're not, at least we've done our job with being the men that we've been able to become and be able to understand some of the things and lifelong lessons that we've gone through, that we know, if we know then what we know now, we will make some changes. But we can see a lot of that happen beforehand because we've gone through this, and because we have each other to have these type of conversations around keeping each other, having the trust, the positivity, respect, and keeping each other accountable. So thank you guys for having this conversation around brotherhood and what does that mean to us now. But we'll check back in with you again soon. Thanks so much for this, the Brother Show.